Good morning, everybody. This is Michelle Nightpaver. I'm the co-director of MEDIC. I'm officially kicking off our fall collaborative-wide meeting. It's great to have you all here. I want to give a shout out and warm welcome to everybody, our clinical champions, our abstractors, our hospital administrators, and special guests and speakers for today. So I hope you will find our meeting today very engaging. We've worked very hard on our agenda. We're going to go through a couple of housekeeping items as we begin to kick off the day. A little technical. So in terms of disclosures, just a reminder to everybody that Keith Coker has a state opioid response grant through SAMHSA in partnership with MOPN to pilot our naloxone distribution to 10 MEDIC ED sites. The rest of us in the coordinating center have nothing to disclose. The agenda today is really about 3 hours. Starting at this point, we'll be done completing our agenda at about noon today, so we'll get you off to an early start to your weekend. In the middle of that, we will break for about a 5-minute coffee session at about 10:55 a.m. You can top off your coffee and come on back. And the morning will be filled with our guests and guest speakers. And in the afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit more about our strategies, set us up for some good quality work in 2021. So the agenda should have been mailed to your email if you're looking to follow along. So just to review some of the ground rules, remember we're on a Zoom platform, but instead of using the typical chat that we have often done in the past, just like our last collaborative-wide meeting, I just want to remind everybody to please use the Q&A function. We really would like this to be as much as possible a discussion, so we welcome your input and your questions, but please do type them in the question and answer section of the Zoom platform. And we have people sitting off-site here that will definitely feed your questions in, and we will get to them. So that's very much encouraged, and we welcome that. As a reminder, we do offer CME for our collaborative-wide meetings, and that was also sent. There's a QR code. You do have to register for a My CME account if you're new to MEDIC. But if you have any trouble at all, please let us know. We can help get that done for you, and it does expire in 6 months. So please make sure to take advantage of that. At the end of our meeting, about 24 hours later, you will receive a survey link in your email. It's very important to us in the coordinating center, as well as Blue Cross Blue Shield, to know that we're adding value to your ED operations in terms of quality. So please do give us some feedback. What's going well? What could be improved? We really do welcome that, and we do act on that. So that'll be coming about 24 hours after the meeting into your email. So please look for it. So I wanted to give you a little bit more of an update on our MEDIC work groups. For those of you who are already in MEDIC in the last few years, you know that the work of MEDIC goes well beyond 3 collaborative-wide meetings a year. There is a lot of detailed deep dive work that typically happens off cycle, and we have masterminded a template of small group format, what we call work groups. So this year we have added an additional work group very excited to talk to you about. Due to the summer's national discourse on social injustice, we in MEDIC felt that it was very important, and we heard from many of you that it was important to you to start having a conversation about how we could use the work that we do and integrate the MEDIC registry and the quality work that we do with a lens of disparities. So our first meeting was kicked off on October 22nd. And we will design a monthly cadence of meetings. If you're still interested in participating, by all means, email us. To those in the other work groups, chest pain, as well as pediatric asthma, we want to thank all of the volunteer clinical champions for their work on this, but they are right now in a pause mode after having produced a wonderful creation of a toolkit for our MEDIC endorsed practices, which Megan Hogikian is going to talk in much more detail to you a little bit later in the presentation. So thank you to those folks, and more work to come in the coming 2021 engagement year. So we want to recognize all good work coming out of MEDIC from our clinical champions and our coordinating center. And we have some new publications coming from a couple of our members. We want to give special kudos and a shout out to Dominique Hill from St. Mary's in Livonia, who just published a paper in the Western Journal of Emergency Medicine, an update on neurologic manifestations of COVID-19, and also recognize Dr. Michelle Macy for 2 publications in the Journal of Pediatrics this past month in November on observation encounters and length of stay benchmarking in children's hospitals, as well as hospital observation status and readmission rates. Congratulations, ladies. So there has been another election that went on this past fall, and in addition to the national election, and we actually have the results from ours. And we want to thank everybody who has served on the executive committee to date. But we also want to announce the results of our executive committee moving forward for 21 and 22. So Dr. Dominique Hill from St. Mary's in Livonia, Dr. Rob Nolan from Spectrum Health in Lakeland and St. Joe, Aaron Brennan from Sinai Grace Hospital in Detroit, Seth Krupp, Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, Tim Archer from Munson Medical Center in Traverse City, Raj Arora from Children's Hospital in Detroit, and Beth Plemons, Henry Ford Hospital, representing both Wyandotte and Brownstown, and Blaine Dennis from Beaumont Hospital in Troy, and finally Lee Benjamin from St. Joe Mercy Hospital in Ann Arbor. Welcome aboard, and we look forward to your stewardship as we guide ourselves through the coming year. So also just a little reminder, we were very busy this summer in response to COVID-19, and we prepared several virtual grand rounds, and those CME credits are still up for grabs. So you are welcome to sign in, take a look at those, and claim credit for CME. So if you haven't already, please do so. So now we're going to get a little bit to the business of MEDIC. Every collaborative-wide meeting, as you know, we usually start ourselves off with a dashboard of where are we in our quality journey. So this dashboard is a little bit different this year, and I want to just call your attention to the year-over-year performance, and we'll go through each quality measure. But I want to just bring your attention to the qualifiers as you're looking at the data for 2020. That asterisk at the top signals our strategy, which we've discussed both internal in the coordinating center as well with the collaborative, about our strategy of how we're going to measure our performance as a result of the impact of COVID-19, which we know has had a significant impact on all of us as providers and in our institutions. So this data actually excludes several key members, just so that you are aware who's in, who's out to these numbers, but also to just let you know that the data is really based on a smaller segment of time, January and February of 2020, and omitting the bulk of the impact of COVID, spring and early summer, and then resuming in July, which is the last complete set of data we have. So you can tell that that is still missing the fall data abstraction and finalization that is currently ongoing. So this really represents 3 months of data. So, but as you can see, we have some things to talk about today, and we're going to go into those in a deeper dive this afternoon. But let's just run through them so we all kind of know where we're at this point. So remember, the adult minor head injury, we're looking at CT appropriateness, and the trend is usually upward. And in our table here, we see a slight downward trend at 51.1%. In pediatric minor head injury, the measure is a CT overuse measure. And again, the trend is downward. So we see there is a trend downward for the first 3 years, and then a significant uptick in 2020 for at least these 3 months that have been reported and finalized. Similarly, for pediatric minor head injury, the intermediate risk CT use, again, the downward trend is what we would like to see. And we see in 2020 another slight upward uptick. And then finally, we want to see an upward trend for adult CT for suspected PE, the diagnostic yield quality measure. Year over year performance is slightly trending upward, and at least 2020 seems to be stabilized at 9.3. And then the pediatric respiratory measure for chest x-ray use is a utilization measure. We'd like to see less chest x-rays done in these cases. And again, in 2020, we see a slight uptick. So we're going to jump a little bit, and I will give you a little bit of time to ask me questions about this, but please do know we're going to go into this in a little bit deeper way this afternoon. So in terms of, I know what's on everybody's mind, it's, gee, are we going to get VBR in the coming year? So we want to just remind everybody that this is a little bit different data than the previous slide, in that not every institution is eligible for VBR. Remember, it requires a full baseline year of data, followed by a year being measured. And then in the following year, if you qualify for that team target acquisition, then you then you are able to get VBR. So for the CT scan appropriateness for the adult minor head injury, remember that our target is typically around 50, I'm sorry, I need my glasses, 50%. And you can see that we are near that target for these 3 months. So we're relatively safe for the months that we have finalized. For the pediatric overuse and minor head injury, there's a little bit of an up and undulating pattern here for the 3 month of data that we do have, and we're on the cusp of the threshold for qualifying for VBR, but it'll all come down to that finalization of data that we have yet to see. For the intermediate pediatric head injury CT use, we have a little bit more of an issue because we are not quite hitting our threshold. And remember, as a team, we need to qualify for all of these things to get VBR as a team. So the finalization of data is going to be very important for VBR subsequently. So I'm going to stop there for just a minute and see if there's any questions from our collaborative about these information, these data. Okay, I see no questions, so we're going to push forward here and move on to introduce our visitor. And we want to introduce Dr. James Grant. He is now the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer. There's been some change in leadership in Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we want to give him a warm, hearty medic welcome. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about his accomplishments, which are quite lengthy. So Dr. Grant came to us most recently by way of Cedars-Sinai in California. But the reality is he's a Michigan person. In fact, he's had numerous leadership positions throughout the state. He's an anesthesiologist who has been the past chair of anesthesiology at Beaumont Health at Royal Oak Campus. He served in executive functions both for the American Society of Anesthesiology, where he's been chair or a member of significant committees and leadership positions within that organization. He's been on the board of directors for the Anesthesia Foundation and the Foundation for Anesthesia Education and Research. He's a past president of Michigan State Medical Society and the Michigan Society of Anesthesiology with numerous awards for that service. He's also been a president in the past of the Michigan Board of Medicine and is an examiner for the American Board of Anesthesiology. He is a trained physician from our own institutions, receiving his BS degree from Michigan State and his MD degree from Wayne State University. Did his residency at Northwestern and received his MBA from Indiana University. So welcome, Dr. Grant. We look forward to your kind words of, and as you envision what your role will be and in the CQI family, we're happy to hear from you. At the end of your words, there may be some questions for you, which I will be fed and I will ask you. So just stay online once you complete your talk.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone here at Medicum for the opportunity for me to come spend a little bit of virtual time with you. I actually yearn for the day that actually I can come to your meeting and actually, meet everyone face to face, because I think there's no substitution for it. But I thank you for your warm welcome. Thank you for welcoming me back to Michigan after spending the past couple of years in California. I'm really excited about this position. What we're planning on doing is we want to continue to grow the collaboratives. We believe the collaboratives are incredibly important to the work that we do throughout the state. The collaboratives actually are amazingly well known throughout the country and actually have given Michigan a pretty shining star in the rest of the healthcare community for all the work of all 17 collaboratives, which my predecessors, Tom Simmer, should get a lot of credit for. Tom Lydon needs to get a lot of credit for. But we're going to continue to build it, and I want you to know that you have our total support. Chief Medical Officer at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I always said when I was offered the job, it was going to be tough to fill Tom Simmer's shoes, and I truly do believe that. But what we're going to do is we're going to build the office of the Chief Medical Officers to a great clinical enterprise that pretty much should touch everything throughout Blue Cross Blue Shield in Michigan. We also want to be, customer friendly. In this case, you are our customers. We want to make sure that we're there for what you need. You've got the accessibility to us, and you give us the input. And it's the good, bad, and the ugly that we're going to want. My leadership style has been totally transparent. I want you to have continuous access to me if there's anything that I need to know. This is actually in some ways, it's a career pivot for me. I have spent my entire career in the provider world. But on the other hand, I think that actually coming from the provider world, and just like you, a hospital-based provider, it gives a different perspective. I've already given different perspectives when I've been at the big table. I've been invited to sit at the big table. And so I'm on what we call the executive committee of the officers at Blue Cross Blue Shield in Michigan. So I'm your clinical voice. And that's how I see it, is I'm the clinical voice that gives the clinical input to the organization that helps us actually, be a better company and better serve both our customers, our members, and our providers. So I'm excited about the opportunity I've been given, and I'm really excited about spending some time and meeting all of you. I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call with anyone, happy to get a phone call with anyone, and like I said, it's going to be some great new beginnings. And without your input, we won't succeed. But with your input, we're going to do some really great things. I am open to any questions that you have, except who's going to win the national election. That I have no answer to, but I think I have a feeling. Questions, inputs, complaints.
I have one question for you, Dr. Grant.
Okay.
We're an emergency department collaborative. What can we do, and how can we meet some of the things you have, and as you think about the quality collaborative, what's important from the emergency medicine perspective to add to your work overseeing all of the CQIs?
Obviously, clinical care quality is going to be really high up there. And I think the other area that's going to be really high is patient experience. And what do we see from our consumers, from our customers when they enter into an emergency department? Your specialty, like my specialty, we have 5 minutes to develop a trusting relationship with somebody. And I think that's part of the key to our successes is remembering we're there for the patient. And I think the more we focus on some of the customer experience aspects or patient experience aspects, I think we're actually going to be able to build a better product eventually. But we have to continue to take a look at our quality metrics and our safety metrics. And we have to continue, once we've reached certain thresholds, we can't just rest on our laurels, and we have to develop new ones and better ones so that we're continually building a better product.
Thank you. And welcome aboard again. We look forward to working with you.
Me too.
So at this point, we're going to turn the board over to Keith, who's going to introduce our guest speaker of the day and talk a little bit more about chest pain. Keith?
Good morning, everybody. Great to virtually be here with all of you again. And looking forward to the day, of course, when we can once again see you all in person. So I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Simon Mahler. He is an emergency physician, a professor of emergency medicine and epidemiology at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. He's the director of clinical operations there, clinical research and operations there as well. And really has expertise in chest pain, in the use of accelerated diagnostic protocols, particularly the heart risk tool. And that's part of the reason we've invited him. The other thing I sort of learned this morning this week as we were preparing is he's actually from Michigan. He grew up in Ann Arbor and got his medical degree from Michigan State. So it's awesome to welcome a native son home, even if it's virtual. So Dr. Mahler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Keith. I really appreciate the introduction, and it's great to be with you today. As you mentioned, I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and so yeah, I wish I could be with you there in Michigan, but it's a great honor to speak to your group. So I do have a few disclosures. So chest pain is a serious problem, and as an emergency physician, I see patients with chest pain on every shift, usually multiple patients with chest pain. And this is a high stakes encounter. It's high stakes for the patient. If we miss the diagnosis of a myocardial infarction, that patient is going to have a really bad outcome. And it's high stakes for the provider as well. A number one cause of medical malpractice claims against emergency physicians is missed MI. So we see a lot of patients with chest pain in the US. Over 8 million patients present to emergency departments across the country complaining of chest pain. And we still, by and large, in most medical centers, when patients show up to the ED, they're either kept in an observation unit or admitted over half of the time. And we do lengthy evaluations on these patients. We do stress testing or other testing on them, and that costs a lot of money, costs up to $13 billion estimated each year. And so we use all these resources, we do all of these tests, we spend all of this money, and yet less than 10% of the patients that we're evaluating ultimately get diagnosed with an acute coronary syndrome. So we have massive over triage. But on the other hand, it's been estimated in some studies that we're still missing patients with ACS, and up to 2 to 4% of those with ACS may be missed and inappropriately discharged from the emergency department. So we have some under triage as well. So there's negative impacts to this, these inefficiencies, this over and under triage. So when we over triage, we crowd our emergency departments, we crowd our hospital wards, our observation units, and doing all this testing costs a lot of money. Most of these tests, or many of these tests, involve exposing the patient to radiation. And when we place patients at low pretest probability down a diagnostic pathway that includes tests like stress testing, that we're actually more likely to get a false positive stress test than a true positive stress test. And none of this is patient-centered. Dr. Grant was just talking about patient experience. Most patients don't want to be admitted unless they need to be. And so then on the under triage side, there's really important consequences to under triage, and missed ACS that can have a devastating impact for the patient, and then of course malpractice, as I mentioned earlier. So one of the main reasons for these inefficiencies is care variability. We have providers that differ in their experience and their training. They differ in their risk tolerance. Their fear of malpractice can drive their decision making. And many of our providers are still using their Gestalt, or they're using old and unreliable tools for chest pain risk stratification. So there was a study done by Jesse Pines about 10 years ago where he actually used a validated scale, risk-taking scale, to measure risk aversion. And not surprisingly, in patients with chest pain, when there were more risk-averse providers, they had higher admission rates for those patients with chest pain. Many of our providers are still using clinical Gestalt, despite the fact that multiple studies have shown Gestalt is inaccurate. And most of the time, we as clinicians actually overestimate the risk of these patients, which leads to a lot of over-testing. On the other hand, sometimes we're underestimating risk, particularly when patients present atypically, and classically, and what we've seen is in women, we also tend to underestimate risk. So there's a number of different studies on this. So one of the studies that I like is by Rick Body, about 450 patients. What he did is he asked providers basically to what their Gestalt was and whether they thought it was definite ACS, probable ACS, definitely not ACS. And you can see the results here. When the providers thought this is probably ACS, 77% of the time they had no major adverse cardiac events. MACE stands for major adverse cardiac events, so death, MI, or coronary revascularization. when they thought it was definitely ACS. For sure, this is ACS. ACS is my top thing on my differential. It was about a flip of the coin. 47% of the time, they had no adverse cardiac events. And then when, this is the scary one, when they said there's no way that this is ACS, not a chance, definitely not, still almost 10%, 9% now ultimately were diagnosed with MACE. So what's the bottom line here with chest pain? So this is a common condition, and our current patterns are inefficient, and care variability contributes quite a bit to this inefficiency. And Gestalt is not an accurate strategy to risk stratify these patients. So what are our tools in our toolbox when we decide we're going to address some of this care variability and some of these inefficiencies? And really the main tools of doing that are risk scores and accelerated diagnostic pathways or protocols. And I'm going to speak specifically about quite a bit about the heart pathway as it relates to ADPs. So first, a little bit about risk scores. These are tools that objectively combine clinical data to help us risk stratify patients as providers. And typically they incorporate some aspect of the patient history, their risk factors, their electrocardiogram, and then they often incorporate biomarker data. And when we're talking about chest pain, they're incorporating troponin as the main biomarker. So Timmy and Grace, these are kind of the old school tools, the original risk scores. These were actually never designed for emergency department use. These were designed for patients. They were derived and initially validated for patients with ACS, so patients that already were diagnosed with ACS. So those that were sitting in the CCU with MIs, this was used to determine their long-term risk. Subsequently, people looked at this and started using it in the ED, validated their use in the ED, but they were never really designed for that purpose. They do place patients into low, intermediate, and high risk groups, but the problem is with both of these tools that a low risk score is actually not good enough for you, not sensitive enough, not a good enough negative predictive value for you to exclude ACS and then feel comfortable discharging that patient. So while you can risk stratify them, you don't really have a low enough risk group that you can actually feel comfortable sending these patients home. So that leads us to the heart score. And the heart score was designed for the emergency department use, and specifically to help identify patients that are low enough risk that could be discharged. Which is developed in Europe and the Netherlands by Barbara Backus and Jacob Six. It's the heart is an acronym, stands for history, EKG, age, risk factors, and troponins. Each one of those categories scored from 0 to 2, and then you add all of it up. And at the end, if you have a 0 to 3 total, that's a low risk score. 4 to 6 is considered moderate, and 7 or more is considered a high risk score. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a lag with the, there we go. So the heart score has been validated in well over 10,000 patients now. It's very commonly used, and it has about a 98% negative predictive value, maybe a little bit higher than that. One of the things you'll see on this graph is that as you go up with your heart score, you see an increase in MACE precipitously here once you go to 4. There's sort of this inflection point at 4. So you can see the 0 to 3 is our low risk patients, 4 to 6 are our moderate risk, and then our higher risk here. So our group was the first to do a validation of the heart score in the United States. We conducted a study with a little over 1,000 patients in our observation unit at Wake Forest, and this is a very low risk population. So back when I started working with chest pain at Wake Forest, we were admitting or placing in an observation unit over 80% of our patients that came in with chest pain. And so our ultimate MACE rate in these patients that went into the observation unit was 1.1%. So really low risk group. What we did was we applied the heart score to those patients. And what we found was that we could have discharged 84% of that observation unit cohort with a negative predictive value for MACE of 99.4%. One of the things we did notice, though, is that we would have missed 5 patients with MIs that had low risk scores, all of which on a subsequent troponin would have ruled in for MI. And so that really gave us the idea that maybe heart could be improved by using it as part of a pathway. I do want to share a little bit of how kind of heart stacks up against TIMI as one of the older risk scores. This is data from the iTrax cohort, a large study, and you can see if you're not really familiar with receiver operator curves, these are 2 different lines. This is heart, this is TIMI. The better performance or more accurate a tool is, the more that the curve is going to be towards this corner. So having this heart is clearly kind of well above the TIMI score, and you can see the area under the curve here is higher. So heart was performed better than TIMI in this large study, and there's several others that provide similar results. There's been a couple recent meta-analyses from lots of studies that have been conducted with the heart score, and the data from these studies, one had a pooled miss rate of about 1.6%. A larger one had a pooled miss MACE rate of about 2.1%. So that brings us to the question of, well, what's the acceptable miss rate? Is it okay to miss 2% of major adverse cardiac events? And I usually at this point poll the audience with a show of hands, but that's not possible for this this type of interaction. But I can tell you that typically where people land is they either want it to be less than 1% or less than half of 1%. And this is actually consistent with what's been demonstrated in the literature and what most experts agree with. Less than 1% is really what's considered acceptable in the United States. And so the heart score with a 1.6 to 2% miss MACE rate at 6 weeks based on the meta-analyses is not in that acceptable range. So how do we advance beyond risk scores? Well, accelerated diagnostic protocols are basically pathways, or accelerated diagnostic pathways they're pathways that incorporate a risk score with other clinical variables. So that might be their EKG, that might be biomarkers, or there may be other clinical variables that you add in with that risk score to get a better safety margin. And so when we were looking at that initial study of the heart score, we found that by adding a serial troponin by doing the 0 hour and the 3 hour, adding that to what we're calling a HERE score instead of the heart score, we actually could have had 100% sensitivity for ACS and still could have decreased our observation stays by 80%. So the heart pathway has improved sensitivity and negative predictive value compared to the heart score. So this is the heart pathway. This was the original heart pathway, which is based on contemporary troponins. I'll talk a little bit later about how this might be adapted for high sensitivity troponins, but this is an accelerated diagnostic pathway or protocol version of the heart score. And so it incorporates clinical variables. So the first step is actually looking at the EKG. If that EKG is non-ischemic, if they do not have known coronary disease, and they have a low HERE score, negative serial troponins, this is a patient that can be identified for early discharge. If they don't meet all of those criteria, they fall over here into a bucket of where they are being worked up additionally. So our initial validation was in the MIDAS cohort. This was 1,000 patients from 18 different US emergency departments. And this was a much higher risk cohort than the initial heart score validation that we did in the US. The ACS event rate was 22% in this cohort. But in this cohort, the heart pathway was over 99% sensitive for ACS and would have decreased admissions by over 20%. And we compared it head to head in this study with Gestalt, and heart pathway outperformed clinician Gestalt. So that study led us to the heart pathway randomized controlled trial. This was one of the LLSA, so like the recertification maintenance of board certification articles from 2018. We conducted this study just at Wake Forest. It was 282 patients randomized with equal probability to the heart pathway or care using the ACC AHA guidelines. And we tracked these patients over 30 days, looking at a variety of health outcomes and safety outcomes. So what you can see is that we are actually able with the heart pathway to decrease admissions. We increased our discharge rate by 21% compared to usual care. So we sent home 21% more patients. We actually were able to decrease length of stay by 12 hours. So you can see that in this graph, we've got separation between the usual care and the heart pathway. This graph here is interesting because this shows what happens with the low risk patients, having a much lower length of stay compared to usual care, and then the high risk patients having a higher length of stay, which really speaks to the way that the heart pathway identifies the correct type of patient for admission. And in terms of stress testing, objective cardiac testing, we decreased that over a 30-day period by 12%. And all of this, as you might anticipate, by decreasing admissions and decreasing testing, resulted in a cost savings. And so we evaluated facility fees and professional fees, and we demonstrated a median difference of $216 per patient. And you can see how this broke out as we look at the different risk groups. So the low risk group, their cost of $746 and versus much higher cost at high risk. And then here the usual care in the middle. So when we think about this cost savings of $216 per patient, and we can extrapolate that over the 8 to 10 million patients seen in the U.S. each year, that's a considerable cost savings when extrapolated. That means if every place in the U.S. implemented the heart pathway, the potential savings is in the billions, $1.7 to $2 billion per year. So we were able to achieve all these efficiency gains without having any increase in adverse cardiac events. In fact, none of the patients identified as low risk by the heart pathway had any major adverse cardiac events. And the other thing you worry about when you do a study like this, or when you put in place something that's going to discharge patients more rapidly, whether or not those patients are just going to come right back, and whether you're going to have this revolving door where you're not actually decreasing the admissions, you're just kicking the can down the road, so to speak. And so we looked at this and we saw no significant increase in downstream hospitalizations, and we actually saw no increase in cardiac related repeat or return emergency department visits. So no increase in cardiac related recurrent care. So really, to summarize the initial heart pathway studies, is we've clearly demonstrated that we can reduce our healthcare utilization outcomes. We reduce stress testing, hospitalizations, length of stay, and cost, and we can accomplish this without increasing either adverse safety events or having increased recurrent cardiac related care. So the next step for us after demonstrating that was determining how do we use this best within the clinical workflow. And so we were able to get funding from the AAMC and the Donahue Foundation to do an implementation study where we implemented across the 3 hospitals within the Wake Forest Health System. And we actually integrated the heart pathway as a clinical decision support tool built into our Epic EMR on which went live in November of 2014. And so this was an intelligent contextual launch, which means that when a patient met certain criteria based on their age, their chief complaint, and whether or not a troponin was ordered, they received a best practice advisory or a pop-up alert that then sent them down a series of questions which they could answer and then get real-time decision support based on their answers. So a high-risk patient, they might get an at-risk message or a low-risk message depending on their score and their combination of troponin results. So the way that we designed this study was a pre-post interrupted time series. So we measured outcomes for 12 months prior to implementation. We had a brief wash-in period where we were implementing, and then we measured outcomes for 12 months after implementation. And so I'm going to show you some of the impact of that. First is we had almost 4,000 patients, just under, in the pre-implementation phase, and we had well over almost 5,000 in our post-implementation phase, but very similar in terms of their makeup of male, female, and white, non-white. Total of almost 8,500 patients. And what we demonstrated was that we were able to achieve, after implementation, a 91% adherence in terms of use of our heart pathway tool, which is really high for the use of any type of pathway or protocol among physicians and advanced practice providers. And you can see here, we were able to reduce hospitalizations. The absolute reduction was 6%. You can see in the pre-period, we were actually having a slight uptrend over time in our hospitalization rate for patients with chest pain, and there was some variability from month to month. And here is our post-implementation period, and you can see that we actually had a downtrend over the year that we measured this, and also the clustering of these measurements, it's much more clustered, there's less variability, and so it shows the reduction in variability that you can get with using implementing a pathway. And importantly, what we were able to demonstrate is that among our low-risk patients, death in MI occurred only 0.4% of the time, and this was all-cause death. When we look further at cardiovascular death, the rate was even lower. If you use all-cause death, MI, and coronary revascularization for a MACE outcome, this only goes to 0.5%, so much lower miss rate than what we were talking about before with the heart score. We also demonstrated a significant reduction in length of stay as well. So I mentioned before that when I first started working with chest pain at Wake Forest, we were at 81% admission rate, and our length of stay was 22 hours. When we first started working with the heart pathway and started implementing that in our clinical workflow, we were able to reduce our admission rate to 61% and our total length of stay to 18 hours on average. And then integrating it fully into our electronic health record got us down a little bit more incrementally, down to about 56% and 16 hours on average length of stay. So the question is kind of, what do we do? Where do we go from here? We're still working on getting that lower. We're working on optimization of our integration within the EHR, and I'll show you some of that in a minute. And also with high sensitivity troponins, which if used properly can further drive down the number of patients that are admitted and reduce length of stay. So we did look at some subgroups here. We looked at women, and we did racial analysis as well. And what we found was actually that women were more likely, and actually non-white patients were more likely as well, to be identified as low risk compared to their counterparts. But importantly, there was no difference in safety events. It was safe. The heart pathway was safe in males, females, whites, and non-whites. So one of the things we were interested in also in this large cohort was to see whether or not there was a very low risk group of patients that could potentially be risk stratified without the use of a troponin. And so we looked at these patients with HERE scores of 0 to 1, and that was about 9% of our cohort. What we found was even without troponin, we had a negative predictive value that was 99.1%. So a miss rate less than 1% in those patients. In fact, when the patients had a HERE score of 0, none of them went on to have an elevated troponin. And you can see here the negative predictive value for the 0-1. It's marginally, but not statistically significant, probably not clinically significant in terms of difference. Now, we have yet to this needs further validation. I'm not telling you not to send troponins on these patients, but in the future, we may be able to make that recommendation that patients with really low HERE scores may not even need a troponin. So what's the impact on observation unit? Many of you probably work at a hospital that has an observation unit, and what we found was that actually the heart pathway had very little effect on the number of patients that we put into our chest pain protocol. But what happened was, instead of putting low-risk patients in our chest pain protocol, we were putting patients that were intermediate risk in our chest pain observation unit. And so our patients were older, they were much more likely to have comorbid diseases, and they had we had a higher diagnostic yield for MI. And so you can see here our diagnostic yield prior, and then the diagnostic yield after implementation of the heart pathway. Now, 2% is still quite low, so we still have a lot of room to improve on this, but moving in the right direction. So how do we scale this? So one of the challenges is that what we did initially to build our heart pathway into the electronic health record was build directly within Epic. And even though we could share some of the code with another hospital, that hospital would basically have to write code, and every hospital that wanted to do that, to implement the heart pathway, would have to almost reinvent the wheel. I mean, we'd be able to provide a little bit of guidance, but it wasn't a scalable solution. And so that's when we started looking into SmartFire as a way of doing EMR integration. These are interoperability standards. They're web-based applications that can read and write to the EHR, and they're really agnostic to the EHR. So the same application can be used in Cerner as Epic. In some places where some health systems actually have some sites on Cerner and some others on Epic, it can be used across that one system. It's less IT resource intensive because it requires very little build time. It really follows more of an app store model, and you are no longer constrained by the limitations of Epic or Cerner when you're developing your user interface. Your user interface can be more styled along, like you would a web-based interface. So I mentioned the App Store model. So the way this works is just like you download an app to your phone to improve the functionality of your phone. Now health systems have the opportunity to use either the Epic App Orchard or the Cerner App Store to download a healthcare app to their electronic health record to make their EHR work better, to improve the workflow for their providers and the care of their patients. So we have a heart pathway EMR app. It has better integration with the EMR, much faster and easier to use. And the other thing is that we're able to do is create a custom data analytics. Basically an admin dashboard that's really useful for our administrators, for our medical director and operations team. This is what it looks like. You can see that this is obviously a fake patient. It's directly integrated into, this is in Epic. Same thing can happen in Cerner, and actually in some other EHRs as well. But you can see it launches right into the Epic environment. So it's seamless. It's not like you're leaving to go to another website, and the provider basically clicks and makes some determinations, takes them through a heart pathway assessment, and ultimately when they're done, they get to a results screen. So for those of you that have iPhones, we also developed a Heart Pathway mobile application. This is a free download from the iTunes App Store. So if you want to put the Heart Pathway application on your iPhone, it's free to do so. So that the iPhone app helps with individual providers, whereas the App Store model helps it with an enterprise or health system based solution. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the current and future issues or questions about the heart pathway. And one of the biggest ones is, how do we use the heart pathway or modify the heart pathway once high sensitivity troponins come online? And we've done some studies with high sensitivity troponins. Actually, we did a study that was published back in 2017, well before we had approval of high sensitivity troponins and well before widespread implementation. And actually what you can see is compared to, this is a contemporary Siemens assay versus the Abbott high sensitivity troponin I, we didn't really have any major difference when we looked at 0 and 3 and we were using cut points at the 99th percentile. So we actually did not show in this is a smaller cohort. This was from our randomized controlled trial of 282 patients, but in that cohort, it really would not have changed our performance characteristics. But this basically means we could use use the heart pathway the same way as we do with contemporary troponins and have very similar performance. The problem with that is we really would fail to take advantage of the new high sensitivity troponin assays' improved precision and their ability to detect MI much earlier. So we have some suggested major changes that we've made to the heart pathway at Wake Forest, and this is yet to be validated or published. But this is what we are doing at Wake Forest, and there are a couple other hospitals that are using this same protocol as well. So the first thing is including an option for a one and done strategy. So a one and done strategy means taking a very low initial. So on arrival, you get a high sensitivity troponin measure. If it's very low, usually right around the level of quantification, so right at the level where they can report it. With a low risk HERE score, those are patients that are potentially able to be discharged depending on the length of time that they've had chest pain. So usually if they've had chest pain for more than 3 hours and or their onset was more than 3 hours ago, I should say, if they have a low enough troponin, they might be able to be discharged with just a single troponin. The other thing is shortening that serial troponin measurement down. So we are a little bit more conservative. We went with a 0 and 2 as opposed to where we were before with contemporaries at 0 to 3. So we're able to shave an hour off of all of our chest pain workups. Some places are a little bit more aggressive and are using a 0 and 1 hour serial troponin. And we can talk a little bit more if there are questions about why we made that decision. But there's literature that does support 0 and 1 hour as well. So the other thing was once you have a patient, even in that moderate risk with 2 negative high sensitivity troponins, you've essentially ruled out an MI for those patients. And so we are now discharging those patients with rapid follow-up rather than keeping them in our OBS unit or admitting them. So this is the new pathway incorporating high sensitivity troponin. You can see it's a lot more complex than the original heart pathway that I showed to you. It still starts with our EKG, so we're still incorporating clinical variables. We're still considering coronary disease and then a HEAR score. Those patients with a low HEAR score, if they have chest pain for onset of more than 3 hours and a very low initial troponin, they're eligible for discharge just on the basis of that one high sensitivity troponin. If not, if they have a 0 and 2 hours that is low with a low delta, those patients are identified for discharge. We have a much higher, so the 99th percentile is here at 19. We have a much higher kind of rule-in range. So we're using a rule-in range of 5 times the upper end of normal. And then we have an observation zone where we're doing more testing, more serial troponins for patients that fall in between. And you'll notice that we have this outpatient pathway. So if we have patients that have a HEAR score of 4 to 6, but 2 troponins below the upper reference limit and without a significant rise, a delta rise, then those patients are eligible to go through an outpatient pathway where they get follow-up within 72 hours with cardiology, who decides on further evaluation. So we talked about improving decision support a little bit, and with a more complex protocol, the need for decision support integrated into the EHR is that much greater. This is a little bit old. We have a newer version than this that actually also shows the delta, but you can see here, this is showing the risk score and then integrating the 2 different high sensitivity troponin results. Our newest one actually displays a delta value as well. And so then it integrates these and provides recommendations to the provider in real time. So the other thing that we've been examining is whether we can use the heart pathway in other healthcare settings. And in particular, we've been doing a lot of work on the pre-hospital environment. So can we use the pre-hospital to do better risk stratification prior to the patient arriving to the ED? And can we find patients in the EMS that maybe should be going to a different facility? So maybe patients who are having an MI shouldn't go to that local hospital where they're just going to need to be transferred. They should go directly to the tertiary care center where they have cath lab capability. Similarly, maybe a low risk patient might need maybe they would benefit from an alternate destination. So that's what this type of protocol, a modified heart pathway for pre-hospital use, may be able to do. We just recently published this in PLOS One earlier this year. This is a study of 395 patients. The study was funded by Abbott. We basically equipped multiple ambulances across 3 different EMS agencies within North Carolina. We equipped them with iStat point of care troponin iStat devices, and they would use the point of care troponin. So they would draw blood in the ambulance, they'd run the point of care troponin while they were in transport. And what we found was when these patients had a positive troponin, the specificity was really quite high. We had a total of our cohort had a pretty high MACE rate, so about 18.7%, and specificity for a positive troponin was 96.6%. So probably high enough for us to be making some decisions of maybe this patient with this elevated troponin should go to a tertiary care center. And the next part of the pathway is, if they are negative, is looking at the HEAR score. And what we found was with the low risk HEAR score and negative troponin, with the point of care, this got us to a negative predictive value of 94.4%. But we also ran that EMS blood on a more sensitive, now this was a contemporary assay, not a high sensitivity assay, but we were able to get that up to 100% negative predictive value when we ran this on a better troponin. So as what this tells us is that the ISTAT probably was not sensitive enough to exclude adverse cardiac events in the field, but as assays get improved, and there are new and improved point of care assays that are becoming available in the marketplace that will resemble even high sensitivity performance, that this may be possible. So I want to summarize by first thanking Medic for the opportunity to speak. Care variability and Gestalt are key drivers of inefficient chest pain care. And the heart pathway is a accelerated diagnostic protocol that safely can identify low-risk patients for early discharge from the emergency department. And in our opinion and experience, integrating this directly into the electronic record is going to enhance the usability and actually lead to greater efficiency gains, and improves the scalability of these ADPs as we look to do what Medic is doing to improve systems of care on a large scale. So I thank you for your attention, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have spoken with you today.
Thanks, Simon. That was awesome. And it's actually perfect because this is exactly where we are in our development as a collaborative, and trying to understand how we can exactly address the kinds of things you described here around care variability. I have so many questions, but personally, but I think we've got a few that are lined up from our audience. So I'm going to let Megan begin to call those out. So Megan, what questions should we start with?
Yes, so the first one was about whether you think that physicians will be resistant to using the SmartFire because it's just one more step in the documentation process.
That's a great question. Actually, the way that we have, the way that we've developed our tools, you know, I'm a practicing emergency physician, and all of the team that I have working on this is our practicing emergency physicians, and so we were very cognizant of that. And the idea of double documentation is kind of a nightmare. So what we've done is when those, you know, I showed you that integrated tool where you're clicking on some boxes. What happens there is we've developed a feature where that actually becomes a narrative that can be then basically pasted into your note. So you can drop that into your note, and so you don't actually have to double document. So when you're filling out the heart pathway assessment, you're actually filling out a level 5 history, and it just creates a narrative. And so that minimizes the documentation. It actually becomes almost, I'm not going to say it's a time saver, but usually it only takes about 30 seconds to go through the tool. And so at the end of 30 seconds, you push one button and you've got your history component written, and also your EKG interpretation.
Thank you.
Got some more?
Yes, we do. Yeah. The next question here is whether you have a key element of the heart score, such as a location or sharpness, that either really concerns you or reassures you, or is it really just the full picture?
Yeah, it's really the full picture. And there are, there's studies that show that certain aspects of the heart score are probably more important than others, but of course it's validated as a whole package. And so I wouldn't recommend, picking and choosing, because then it would no longer be validated. You'd have to validate that yourself prior to clinical use.
Can I follow up a little bit about that? You know, one
Sure.
of the things I think that I'm mindful of is, you know, there's a certain allure to the heart score because, you know, it spells out heart.
Yeah.
You know, it was developed in the ED, and there are several things that are pretty objective about it. But certainly, I think the one that's a little challenged around that is that history section, where it feels like it's a Gestalt statement.
Yeah.
What's your sort of take on that, and any guidance around how to approach in particular assigning points to that particular domain?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that actually. So one of the key, and I did not include it in my slide deck, but one of the key differences between the way that we use the heart pathway and the heart score is that we use objective criteria. We do not use Gestalt for our history, and so um, we require the provider to go through and go through key elements of the history and document those. And so it becomes much less subjective. We do, there are ways that you can operationalize this that aren't in the EMR workflow. Initially, when we did this, we had a little paper guidance to say, well, what really is moderate suspicion or high suspicion, or what's low suspicion as it relates to the H part, the history part of the heart score. So, one of the reasons actually initially when we started working with the heart score, we had less guidance. We just used it like it was presented in Europe, and it was a full gestalt. And when our IRB, when we were doing our initial randomized controlled trial, one of the things our IRB required was that prior to any decision making being done, they wanted an expert to come behind and do a blinded assessment. So for every patient that got in a HEAR score or heart score done in in our ED, we had an expert come behind them and do another one blinded. And initially what we found was that there were massive differences between our expert and our ED provider. And a lot of them had to do with this Gestalt element in the history. And so we actually moved really towards making it completely objective.
I have seen at least some publications that suggest too that, provider to provider, at least the total tool is pretty reproducible. But, please correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, there are some different studies that show, so we've done some work with, and done studies that show, kappas that are acceptable. There are other studies that have not found that, so there's some variability there. There's a recent study, I believe, that came out of Vanderbilt maybe a year or two ago that showed that cardiologists and ED physicians couldn't agree on heart scores, and their agreement was poor. Yeah, but a lot of the most variability comes from that history section. There is some variability around EKG interpretation, and there's also some variability around risk scores, because we all know from working in the ED that a patient might tell us that they don't have high blood pressure, and you go into their chart and they're on 3 different blood pressure medicines, and it's clearly documented. But what I might put into the HEAR score might be based on what the patient report is, or the patient might with one provider forget to tell them that they have high blood pressure, and the next provider they say they have it. And so there are these when you do the provider you do the inter-rater reliability, all those things factor in, and so it's not excellent. But in our studies it's been acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's specific to, this particular risk tool. I mean, I think that's the reality of all risk tools, generally speaking. So,
and I think us having objective history component actually does help with the reproducibility as well.
Yeah. All right, I just monopolized a lot of time because I know there are other questions. So Megan, what else we got?
Yes, this one's a bit of a long one. So for patients with a low risk heart score that are being discharged, when are you recommending they get provocative testing and/or expedited follow-up if you don't have rapid cardiology follow-up, as you alluded to?
Yeah, so what we did in our randomized controlled trial, which was really the first prospective study to discharge patients from the emergency department based on on the heart score or HEAR score, we just recommended that they follow up with their primary care provider within 30 days for low risk patients because they're at very low risk. And based on the heart pathway, most recent large heart pathway data, the event rate is quite low for these patients over a 30-day period. And so, we don't want to talk about it necessarily as a 30-day warranty, but if they can get follow up within 30 days, we feel comfortable. We don't need to get stress testing. In fact, stress testing is probably counterproductive in the vast majority of these patients, even on an outpatient basis, because it's more likely to be a false positive than it is to be a true positive. And so really they need to follow up with their primary care provider. What we found is, and we didn't have as large of a reduction on stress testing over 30 days as what we thought we would. What we found is that still quite often the patient follows up with their primary care provider, and that primary care provider goes ahead and then orders a stress test anyway. But that's sort of to the next phase of working to improve that. What kind of where we've been focusing, first on our ED care of chest pain. But to answer your question, even though it's still somewhat at odds with guidelines, 72-hour stress testing, really updated guidelines are no longer going to reflect the need to do that. And so we don't do that. We just have them follow up with their primary care doctor.
Yeah, I feel like there is this kind of undercurrent of a move away from, the kind of sense of a mandate of requiring stress testing to further risk stratify this, already low risk population. So do you see that in the future? You sort of mentioned probably the guidelines will catch up with that in a little bit, or?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that the guidelines, which have been sort of in the ACC/AHA guidelines, were supposed to be revised and released a while ago. But I believe when they come out, this will be, first of all, they're going to be encouraging use of tools like the heart score, like the heart pathway. And secondly, the mandate for 72-hour follow-up with stress testing for all chest pain patients. I'm pretty confident that that will not be there anymore.
More questions, Megan? Yeah.
Yes. This listener is wondering, do you have data on MACE with HERE scores of 4 to 6 with 2 negative high sensitivity troponins who may be going home with rapid cardiology follow-up?
Yeah, so we actually just transitioned to high sensitivity troponin in August, and so we don't have a lot of data on this process yet. A lot of other places have rolled this out, and based on European data, we think this is going to be quite safe. But we don't have a lot of US data on those particular patients and on our pathway and exactly how it's working. And so I would say stay tuned, but we get the feeling that from the European data that this is going to be fine. A lot of the European data is just using troponins alone, like I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with the European Society of Cardiology recommendations and their ESC 0 1-hour algorithm, but these are troponin only algorithms that are being used, and they don't incorporate risk scores, and they don't incorporate other clinical variables like the EKG. So we feel like our pathway is going to be more robust by including some of those other clinical variables, but we also know that even with just using troponins alone, we can identify a relatively low risk or lower risk group.
More questions, Megan?
Yes, yeah, just one more here. This listener is wondering if you are using the heart pathway for patients presenting with agonal equivalents like nausea and dyspnea.
Yeah, we do. That's a really good question. We do use it for patients with anginal equivalents. I will give the caveat that when you do your history for those patients, particularly for us, when we're using an objective history, those patients are going to tend to score lower. They're going to have less history points because a lot of it is based on classic. Do they have chest pressure and do they have arm radiation and so on. So patients who come in with shortness of breath, if we have a concern for ACS, we will still use the heart pathway. But there are some caveats. All of our studies included those patients, though. So all of the data that I presented to you today includes not just patients with chest pain. I tend to say chest pain, but really what we're talking about is a patient who presents to the emergency department with symptoms concerning for acute coronary syndrome. And I apologize if that was confusing. I use chest pain as a shorthand, but really we're talking about the full spectrum of patients that could have ACS.
For the audience, you're welcome to continue to submit questions. We have some time here. I'm going to unload some of mine actually, because I have a lot that I want to pick your brain about. And one of the things I'm really mindful about here is, it sounds like you've got a lot of experience in sort of the real world implementation of these kind of pathways, particularly centered around heart score or the heart pathway. I'm mindful that we have 23 different types and flavors of EDs, lots of different types of settings, rural, urban, suburban, small community, academic centers with trainees. Any advice about how to roll something like this out, given some of those realities in the context?
Yeah, we actually did some qualitative work studying this, and we actually published a manuscript on some of the barriers and facilitators to implementation. And of course, just with anything, and I'm sure your group knows this really well, it all starts with getting all of this, having a champion and getting the stakeholders, key stakeholders involved. That is key. But usually the main barriers really are on the IT side. And a lot of community hospitals lack bandwidth in the IT areas, and even the academic centers can be, or large tertiary care centers can have IT that's departments that are overloaded with tasks, and so that can become a real barrier. And that was one of the reasons that we decided to develop this scalable app that requires really minimal development. It can be downloaded, and we've had hospitals that have downloaded it and been able to use it within a matter of hours. So the development time and the IT budget is super, condensed and small. So IT has been a huge barrier that we found initially when we tried to do some scaling of this. The other thing I would say is, whenever you try to implement, obviously, those of you that have worked in implementation, there's always early adopters and then there's late adopters, and having some system. The reason why we were able to achieve 91% adherence was because we had an audit and feedback system, and having some way of pinging your providers that are not doing it, and those that are rewarding those that are doing it, a carrot and stick type of mentality. And so we identified our providers that weren't doing it and provided them with re-education opportunities until they finally got the message to do it. And so those kind of things are key in terms of getting the group in line to do it. And of course, you need to have buy-in from, as I said, from all the key stakeholders and leaders within your institution.
I'm curious, on the provider front, in your experience, what seems to be the main source of, let's say, main barrier to adopting this? I mean, is it sort of fear of missing the events? Is it around that? Is it just the standard kind of behavior change? I'm used to my stuff and I don't want to change. And
I think that the latter is the biggest aspect of it, is just the human behavior side of things. And as physicians, we tend to be pretty resistant to change. And the other thing that we're resistant to is the idea of cookbook medicine and the idea that we will use our brains and will know best. Unfortunately, the data doesn't support that we can use our gestalt and do a great job. It's interesting, there's a study, I think it was Jeff Klein, and I think it was on PE work, but a study where basically looking at Wells, maybe it wasn't Jeff, but it was a study on the Wells score for PE, and for a third of the providers, it really improved their their ability to that they had poor gestalt. And so for a third of the providers, really dramatically improved their ability to pick up PEs. And for a third of providers, it was about their performance about the same. And for a third of providers, they actually outperformed the Wells score with their gestalt. What a tool like this does is actually brings up the lower providers to that middle of the pack. But the problem is that I've never known a physician who says, well, I'm a lower provider, or my gestalt is not good, right? So it's tough. It's like that classic question where people are asked if they're a good driver or if they're above average driver, and then 85% of the respondents say they're above average, right? Which obviously is impossible. We have a blind spot when it comes to this, and so most of us don't want to be told how to practice medicine, and this is by many is seen as kind of a slippery slope kind of thing. Well, now they're telling me when I should admit and discharge a patient and what the risk of that patient is. Now, you still have to use, I still always give caveats that clinical judgment still has to be used. The no risk score or pathway can account for every scenario. There may be social situations, or there may be other risk factors that aren't included in the heart pathway that need to be considered. So you still have to be a clinician. But yeah, that's the major barrier, is people say, oh, I don't really need this. I'm fine on my own. I can just do my own thing or do what I've always been doing.
Thanks. Yeah. Any questions, Megan? Additional questions that have been coming in from the audience?
Yes, I think one related to what you've been discussing, but maybe a little more specific. How do you give feedback and or reassure providers who continue to admit people with undetectable troponins for concern for, quote, unstable angina?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. One of the things that what we saw initially when we did our studies was early on in our randomized controlled trial, we didn't mandate adherence to our heart pathway protocol. So our heart pathway. So patients that were low risk, if they wanted to keep that patient in the hospital or in the OBS unit and stress test them, they could. And we saw that a lot early in our study, and it was frustrating for me. But then at the end of the study, it's interesting, our usual care group, when those patients were lower risk in usual care, I couldn't get my providers to keep them and follow the ACC/AHA guidelines. So part of it is just getting familiar, I think. But how do I think it's really just education, because there's lots of literature that now demonstrates the safety of these tools. And so just repeated education. If you compare their performance, if they're an outlier, showing them how they compare to their peers is a powerful tool to influence their care and practice changes. And so it can be it can be anonymized where everybody else is not necessarily listed, but they see how they stack up compared to their peers, and that's a very useful way of giving feedback.
For those in the audience, we have those tools, as you know, available. So underscoring the importance of that audit and feedback loop, I agree, that's a key component in any quality improvement process. Additional questions, Megan? I do have one more, and I'm curious about the sort of future state. You mentioned, I think, a lot of this potential towards the end of your talk around integrating high-sensitivity troponins. And I'm curious about, in particular, the role of HERE score as part of that. I mean, do you feel like that risk stratification tool is likely to continue to be of value in the next several years, even as these other things like high-sensitivity troponin come online?
I do, but that is actually, I mean, that's a really good question, because it is an open question in the literature right now. I mean, you have troponin-only pathways that are being demonstrated to be fairly robust. Most of the studies have looked at those mainly use a index MI as the outcome, as opposed to looking at 30-day MACE. So that's one area where we don't have as much literature. There's a study that was done in Sweden where they actually looked at the ESC01 by itself. It performed actually poorly for 30-day MACE, but when they added other clinical variables to it, EKG interpretation and elements of the history, they were able to have a much better and acceptable miss rate. So there are some studies that suggest that risk scores may be a benefit, and there's others that show it makes only a marginal difference. And so the jury is, I think, still out on this. We have some unpublished data that suggests that this may be more important in the U.S. Population than maybe it's been shown to be in Europe or in other places, where basically the performance of the ESC01 across, we did a study of about 1,400 patients, 8 U.S. EDs, and we were unable to validate the troponin only strategies that are popularly used in Europe without the addition of a heart score. So we actually used heart score and not heart pathway in this particular study. But using the heart score in addition to a high sensitivity troponin was superior and got us to that negative predictive value that we want. So that's something that we hope to have published in the next few months.
Great. Well, I think we're coming to the end of questions. It's been awesome to talk to you, Simon. Thank you so much. You've really, I think, given us a lot to work with as we push forward in our quality improvement work, particularly in 2021. We'll talk a lot about that after the break here. We'd love to maybe set up another moment in the future where you can actually come back to your home state, and you talked about going to a football game, and we can figure that out too.
That'd be great. Go Blue.
That's Go Blue certainly for me. I know there's other green and white people out there, so fair enough.
Well, I have ties to both, so.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So I am sort of seeing the time here. We're actually a little bit early, which is great. So what I'm going to suggest is we take a break a little bit longer. Let's come back at 10:50. That'll be like an 8-minute break here, and then we'll start up 10 minutes earlier than what we've got on the agenda. So at 10:50, we'll see you all again. Again, thanks so much, Simon, and all the best.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. As a reminder, I'm Carrie Smith. I'm the clinical lead for Medic. I'm going to be discussing the suspected PE and minor head injury modules overview. But following me, we're going to have the orientation to 2021. We'll also talk about the Medic endorsed practice guidelines and the toolkits. That's also followed by the 2021 P4P and VBR, always the hot topic, and our final remarks at that time. Thank you so much to our previous speakers. They were amazing and I appreciate their time. At the last collaborative-wide meeting, I discussed both the chest pain modules, very appropriate after we had Dr. Mahler, and also our PEDS respiratory. So this time we're going to focus on our remaining 2 modules, and we're going to start with the head injury. So our head injury module is the only module that encompasses both adult and children. It is built to assess for the minor traumatic brain injuries, and the module itself contains 27 questions. It's our longest module. The questions themselves were devised from the Canadian Head CT and PCARN, and the final diagnosis of a closed head injury was not necessary to actually qualify for abstraction. The cohort assignment is designated by ICD-10 diagnosis codes for head facial trauma or chief complaint of a head or facial injury. The superficial injuries are not counted, such as bug bites, dog bites, minor lacerations, those type of things. They're all excluded. The cases are also abstracted whether or not a head CT is performed. We do review all notes of the medical documentation. We look at provider notes, nursing notes, EMS notes. We include them all. We also determine the mechanism of injury, dangerous for adults and severe for children. We pretty much do follow those head CT guidelines for that, as well as the PCARN. We also look if a GCS was performed, and if so, what's the score? So as an overview of the module itself, so that everybody can see what the abstractors are looking at on a day-to-day basis to do this, the first 9 questions of the module itself can stop the abstraction based on the answer. They're exclusionary questions, so if it makes it through all of those 9 questions, then it will continue to the full abstraction. So the first few questions, the first 9 questions are built on, was the injury greater than 24 hours? Because if so, it's excluded. So anything less than 24 hours, and I'm going to talk about that timing a little bit later. Was the injury itself caused by blunt trauma? Also, is the patient on antiplatelet or anticoagulation meds? And of course, do our prior information from Dr. Klein, I did not say blood thinners. It's strictly anticoag or antiplatelets. Was also the trauma service either activated or consulted, because that will also exclude it from this module? Is the patient pregnant? Do they have a bleeding disorder? Is there a suspicion for a non-accidental injury? Does the patient have a ventricular shunt? Or do they have some type of brain tumor, lesion, intracranial mass, AVN, something like that, that would also exclude them? So if they make it through all of these questions, then I'm just going to show you a sampling of some of our questions from the module itself. I've highlighted a few of these because these are the areas that I find we have a little bit more difficulty finding full documentation. So all the questions are very important, but I just want to bring your attention to a few of them a little bit more heavily than the others. So one of the questions is there is documented history of a cognitive deficit, except for when they're acutely intoxicated. It's very helpful to have a baseline cognitive definition of what this person, if there's ANO times 3, or if they have a baseline dementia or other cognitive deficit, it's helpful to know where we're starting at, because we do need to know if there's been altered mental status or amnesia or something, and we need to know if it's different from their baseline. Of course, we always ask if the patient has a headache, pretty obvious for a head injury module. Then we also look at, you can see it's bolded, the documentation of whether they have loss of consciousness with the associating injury or not. That can be a little bit tricky. That's one of the areas that I find through all the SNAP reviews, the audits. There's varying documentation on that, because of course we all know patients throughout their ED stay can say multi things. So they'll tell the nurse one thing, they'll tell the EMS something else, and then they'll eventually tell the provider a completely different story. So it's helpful to have all the documentation a little bit more consistent, but we know that's not always possible. We're also looking if there's documentation of vomiting since the injury and if it's happened more than once. We also look at, is there short-term memory deficits, the amnesia since the injury? So again, that's where that baseline cognition comes into. And do they have a documentation of altered mental status, again, since the injury? So a few more questions that we have, because again, this is the long module, is do we have documentation of a basilar skull fracture? These next few ones are actually very important from the PE, from the physical exam standpoint. So that's where we get some of these answers. So we're looking for signs of a basilar skull fracture. Do they have documentation of an open or depressed skull fracture or tense fontanelle? Does the patient have documentation of either an occipital, parietal, or temporal scalp hematoma? No frontal on this one, but it's also bolded because I found there's many creative ways to talk around a hematoma. So we're trying to determine if it is or not. So I'll get to that a little bit later too. Did the patient have documentation of a seizure since the injury? And do we have any focal neural deficits? We have major cheat sheets for the abstractors on that one. And then this is always the fun one. I've been getting a lot of questions recently about this one. And about the documentation of intoxication and whether that itself lends to just an automatic head CT. So we're looking for this particular question, is there documentation that the patient is still actively intoxicated during evaluation in the ED? I'll talk more about that in a second too. So for takeaway points for documentation for the head injury module, we have a few. The first one is, when did the injury occur? Is it within 24 hours or not? So we need a sense of timing. So it's very helpful when it's like they fell 2 days ago or they just prior to arrival. Some type of timing is helpful. And also if a GCS or a PCS, a pediatric coma score, was actually one recorded. Typically in most places, the nurses do that. So it's helpful to have that listed because we do account for that. Is the patient on anticoagulants? Just because medication is on the med list doesn't always mean they're taking it. So it's very helpful when I see in the documentation that the providers address this specifically. They'll say they're not on anticoagulation or they're not taking aspirin. That's very helpful to see that, because even a single dose of aspirin, it is considered an anticoag and it will end the abstraction. So again, also with the cognitive deficit, we're trying to determine, is this at their baseline or is this new since the injury? It's pretty important. But even more important, I think, is the actual physical exam itself. We rely heavily on this section of the notes, and this is definitely by the provider. So when we're looking at the physical exam, is there the ecchymotic area, an actual hematoma or not? Is it listed as an abrasion, a contusion? There's many words to put, but do you consider that a hematoma? One example I just saw recently was they wrote that there was contusion and bruising posterior to the right ear. So what was the extent of that contusion bruising? I mean, was there swelling? Was there edema? Was it a hematoma or not? And then again, posterior to the right ear doesn't tell me, is it, occipital, temporal, where? We need to have some more specifics on that. So it's just a reminder that as you're doing your physical exam, we look at every word you're writing. And then here for this one, for the intoxication, again, we need some type of verbiage from the providers that the patient is still intoxicated. They can be later clinically sober before they're released, but at any point in the ED visit, were they intoxicated? We do not go through the blood alcohol level, the BAL, because we know that some of our chronic alcoholics, unfortunately, can have an elevated blood alcohol level, but they're not intoxicated. So there is a difference. And of course, the GCS is vital, right? As a reminder, the GCS lets us know if the patient's orientated to time, place, or person, and if they're able to obey commands. So when that intoxicated person comes in and they don't know where they're at, they don't know what time it is, and they're not following any of your commands, a GCS of 15 is not necessarily appropriate at that time. So we're going to move right on to the PE module. So this module overview itself, this is our shortest module, but no less important. It consists of 6 questions. It is based on procedure codes 71260 and 71275, which is technically a chest CT or a CT angiogram. So the qualifying question that starts it off is if the chest CT was ordered by the ED provider. If it's not ordered by the ED provider, we kick it out of our module. It's not appropriate. So we even look, and again, since it is based on the ED provider ordering it, if a consulting team asks for it or recommends it, but the ED provider orders it, it is still their decision to order it, so we count it. Pregnancy itself will stop the abstraction. The question automatically populates for females in the ages group of 10 to 55. We are also looking if there is an acute PE. This is something we capture in this module. So sampling of our suspected PE module questions. Just like to point out, I like to show these. It is very, very helpful for the abstractors, for all their clinical champions to know exactly what is being asked of them. So this is very helpful that I'm able to help the abstractors get all of this out to everybody. So for the PE module question, one of them was the CT performed above done to rule out a PE. That's very important, and we'll get to that in a little bit too. Did the CT scan result in the diagnosis of an acute PE? We'd like to know. A note here that inconclusive, you can see the answers are yes, no, or inconclusive. The inconclusive on an acute pulmonary embolism is not inconclusive due to poor imaging or poor contrast. It's based on inconclusive that the radiologist saw something in there and they can't quite determine whether it was acute or chronic PE. That's the difference and definition of that inconclusive. We also ask if there was not an acute PE, what was found on that CT? I did spend 5 years in thoracic surgery, so I'm pretty qualified to help the abstractors understand this section, and I'm going to go through one part of this in a moment because it's pretty important. But you can see we look at things from pneumonia, the pleural effusions, pericardial effusions, old and new fractures, pneumothorax, aneurysms, dissections, those type of things. We want to know what else was found. So the next, some of the rest of the questions that show up, we also ask if there was a D-dimer done during the visit. And if there was a D-dimer, what is the measurement unit for that? And what was the value? Was the D-dimer itself considered positive? So the takeaway points for documentation on our pulmonary embolisms are these. The most important one, and it's bolded, is because it's not always clear if the CT scan itself was done to rule out a PE. It's very important that we have it in our differential diagnoses. So if there's also, I can see as a clinician, I understand when the provider is asking questions such as, is there recent travel? Was there a pregnancy? Is there malignancy? Is there recent surgery? Do they have swelling of the extremities? I know, again, as the clinician, that most likely you're thinking, is there a PE? And you're trying to see if there's higher risk factors associated with this. But the abstractors themselves need some indication that it's in the list of differential diagnosis. So something a little bit more spelled out is helpful. I'm going to go to that next bolded point. It's incredibly helpful for the abstractors themselves if there is an actual order set that says the CT for pulmonary embolism. I've seen a lot of facilities do that, and that is very helpful for the abstractors because then we know automatically that was in your differential diagnosis, that's why you did that particular order set. Something else we do take into account, as we know in reality, a D-dimer may be done at an outside facility, a primary care office, and then when the result is positive, then they're sent to the ED for evaluation of that. So we do keep that into account, and we can include that in the module. So we allow that to be credited. And we also, a big part is we look at those alternative diagnoses on the CT scans. One of the most difficult things to understand from the results of the CTs, the radiologists can talk around what they see, right? They don't always call an opacity or consolidation a pneumonia. They always want you to clinically correlate it with what's going on. So it's helpful when in the MDM itself that you address that and you state whether you think it's pneumonia or whether it's not, and if you're going to treat it or not. It's very helpful when you address those type of things. And also, if there's lung nodules, of course, we all know that they don't always have to be malignant. There's many reasons for those. So it's just helpful to know if you think it might be a malignancy, is it metastasis, because we do account for malignancies also on the scans. So those are the main points and for those two particular modules. Just again, it was a reminder for everybody to know what the abstractors are responsible for. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Yes, there is one question here from Dr. Davis at Henry Ford Allegiance. He's wondering if we document that we're using age-adjusted D-dimer, is that appropriate for ruling out PE in the PE metric?
We don't address that specifically in the module. That is something that we can look at though, typically even on the back end. But it is something we're keeping in mind. And I don't know if Keith has any additional comments on that one, so I'll let him handle that. Is there any other questions for me specifically?
Nope, that's it.
Great. Okay. I'll hand it over then to Keith, who is going to be talking about 2021 for us anyway. So this is a great segue. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, and I could follow up on that question. Yeah, so we don't specifically abstract that information. We abstract the value of that D-dimer test. And as Carrie was saying, you know, on the back end, we can consider what it would look like if that was age adjusted. But we don't intentionally insert that into the way that we do the quality measurement itself, which is, as you know, diagnostic yield for the CT itself. There may be other questions more directed to me from Carrie's section here, so I'm going to ask if there are other questions too.
Yes, we have one more here from Dr. Veeder at Beaumont Farmington Hills. He's wondering if there can be a discussion about definition of intoxication for head injury. Just because their GCS is normal doesn't mean they're not intoxicated, noting that this has been a challenge for many of us.
Yeah, I certainly recognize that. That particular point comes up quite a bit, I think, in over the years that we've been involved in this quality improvement work. Yeah, so we do collect the presence of intoxication as stated in the chart as a data field. And I would say that's largely a legacy of how we began to collect this information when we first designed the module. Realize this is going back 4 years when we were first beginning this work and MEDIC was starting up. We don't actually use that information though to inform the measurement itself. However, I think it's a example of how we can do our own science with the registry itself and understand to what extent intoxication as retrospectively chart abstracted is meaningful or not. I continue to believe in the evidence myself from the Canadian original derivation of the Canadian rule where GCS is the way to understand if somebody is altered rather than any kind of statement about intoxication, which is challenged because there is a high degree of variability as to what that means. Provider to provider, patient to patient, it's simply an unreliable measure of what intoxication as it translates to altered mental status means. So recognize that we do collect that information, but it's the GCS. You have to have GCS. That's the way these decision rules are designed. Any other questions, Megan?
Yes, yeah, one more here from Dr. Lewandowski.
Okay.
He's noting that in the Canadian CT head rule, it defines a dangerous mechanism as a fall from 3 feet. We deal with many geriatric patients that fall from standing. Is that considered a fall from greater than 3 feet due to the height that their head falls, or does the whole body have to fall over 3 feet?
Yeah, there can be a lot of granularity in getting into the weeds, not just in this example, but in lots of other individual case examples that come up to us all the time. Carrie can speak very very well to some of these, the examples in the PCARN rule as well. I would say specific to the Canadian rule in geriatric populations, of course, if you're over the age of 65, that's already, and you're worried about a significant head injury, that's already a flag for doing a head CT. I would say technically we adhere the best we can to the descriptions of the way those rules were originally outlined in the way they were derived. So yes, I mean, we are looking for a fall, whether it's in the PCARN rule or the Canadian rule as described in the original derivation. Now, the reality is, like, people document in various ways, and so you may not have enough information, and so you have to make some assumptions based on that documentation, as Carrie, has been alluding to all along here. So if there is a fall from a height and it's influencing your decision, make sure that you're documenting that height. Otherwise, we are going by the way the rule is described and what's in the chart. Other questions, Megan?
Nope, that's it for now.
Okay. So let's move on. We're kind of in the home stretch, and really the intent of the last period here of our collaborative-wide meeting is to set all of you up for success in 2021. And we want to provide an orientation for that work and the motivation for what we are going to be asking of you, how we're going to measure that, how we're going to ultimately financially incentivize that, because certainly that's a key component for a lot of you as well, although I would say should not be the only driver of why we think this is good work. So we basically have 4 categories of, at least from the way we think about it in the Corning Center, of how to group our quality initiatives. We have what I would term legacy work around the minor head injury. In adults, where we rely on the Canadian rule. In pediatrics, where we rely on the PCARN rule. We have new initiatives, brand new in 2021 for performance. We've been measuring it in 2020 in low risk chest pain. Obviously, we just had a keynote speaker directly addressing this topic. We are also going to be working on asthma. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. It's actually going to be just the 2 pediatric centers working on that. I do want to recognize that many of you have been engaged in the path work for a number of years across other conditions. I want to thank you for that work. It's not necessarily something that we're going to totally pivot away from, but we are going to focus now collectively in these 2 key areas, these 2 conditions where we think we have opportunity. We do have some maintenance work that's going to continue. This is in the pediatric minor head injury space, the overuse measure. That is shifting into a maintenance. It has been in a maintenance phase. It's going to continue. Ultimately, we will retire that measure likely in 2022. And then we have what we're calling a temporary maintenance phase for the other high priority areas of improvement in suspected PE evaluations and chest x-ray use in pediatric bronchiolitis, asthma, and croup. We are going to put these into a temporary phase. We'll explain what that means in more detail. This was a whole set of decisions that we worked through in collaboration with really the executive committee. We recognize that these 2 areas are particularly challenged in the COVID pandemic. Want to acknowledge that. We don't want people to take their eyes completely off this ball, but we also know it may be harder to get traction on improvement in these areas, which is why we're going to shift them into a temporary maintenance. So here's what to expect. So this is some data that we shared with the executive committee. I want to tell you too, this dashboard is live on the MEDIC registry. So you can go in there right now and look at what your site is doing on this measure. The way that we are displaying this is of those chest pain patients, so those with a primary diagnosis of chest pain, who are low risk by the HERE score and a negative troponin as interpreted by the provider, how many of those patients are discharged? And the point here is to get higher. And so over the measurement period here in 2020, you can see the average performance and the variation across that. And the target is going to be improved greater than 88%. You can see some of us already there, some of us have to improve. But that's what we're going to be working on in the safe discharge space for the majority of you. Two of you who don't see adult patients and therefore don't have an opportunity to improve in chest pain are going to be working on improving discharge rates for asthma. So this is DeVos and this is Chom. This is also an opportunity for us to learn from this experience. We're going to ask both of your sites to improve above the current baseline that you're performing at as the measurement goal here. We think there are several opportunities to improve this outcome. We think time to steroids, time to bronchodilators, standardization of assessments serially in the ED are process measures that are going to impact this outcome. And we have designed measurement strategies, displaying that information on, again, that MEDIC dashboard, which you can see even if you're not participating for performance in 2021, you can actually see your own site's performance now, right now on that dashboard. Now, the bulk of the quality improvement is going to be in the head injury space. And you're probably going to hear us say this a lot, all in for head injury. Again, these are decisions that we work through in collaboration with the executive committee as your voice or in these decisions. And we want to sort of talk through why we think there is a need and an opportunity for this space. So these are the kind of questions we're going to answer here in the next few moments. So think about the life cycle of a quality initiative. We do some baseline data collection. We begin to actively work on it. The measurement begins to top out. So we put it into a maintenance period and then we retire. The adult minor head injury CT appropriateness measure, the pediatric intermediate risk CT utilization measure, those are active. It's the overuse for pediatrics that is in this maintenance period. We believe, and we're going to show you why there's an opportunity to do better. And we're going to double down on these efforts with all of you. So here is our historical performance collectively. The thick red line is the collaborative. You can see each of the cohort groups as you guys joined MEDIC, outlined in other dashed lines. Here's how, and the goal here is up, is to get better by improving our, pardon me, adherence to the measure and therefore appropriateness. We started here, a little above 40% appropriateness for every CT scan we do. We had a period of improvement collectively. Many of the cohorts, the sites within those cohorts got better as well. And then we clearly have this plateau. And this means we're slightly better than 5 out of 10 scans being considered appropriate. And we think, by redoubling our efforts, we can get better. We're actually not, in my opinion, asking for a tremendous amount of improvement here. You can see some of the targets outlined there in yellow, and Andy's going to walk through the specifics of these a little bit later in the scorecards. But we're asking for, I think, fairly modest improvements, but meaningful improvements over the next year in 2021. I'm going to hand things over now to Michelle. Pardon me again. She's going to talk through some of the pediatric things and then wrap up on this section.
Thanks, Keith. Similarly, similar chart to the adult head injury or the pediatric head injury trends over time. And similarly, we ended up with a goal that we wanted to reduce CT as opposed to the appropriateness that is to trend up. Ours, we want to trend down. In the beginning, we began at slightly below 15%. Again, we saw a similar trend like the adults where we saw an initial period of improvement, followed by a bit of a plateau phase. And then you'll notice that as we move along here, there are some trends in the opposite direction here. So we're almost back to where we started, at least on the data that we have to date. So clearly we have a bit of a pullback that we need to make, and another reason why we're all in for head injury this year. Similarly, with pediatric intermediate risk injury, and remember the PCARN rules stratify children according to risk category to low risk versus intermediate risk. And we want to make sure that the intermediate risk trends also trend downward. In other words, we want to do less CT scans in that group too. If we're applying the rules according to the design in which they were intended, we should be able to make an impact in the overall risk group categories, all of them. Again, we began at the beginning with a little over 20%. Initially had some period of improvement as we began to get going and measuring and began to apply these rules. And we started to see some performance, maybe plateauing, but then definitely trending a bit in the wrong direction. So all of these, well, not all of the cohorts are moving in that direction. They're pretty tightly concentrated to where we probably need to work on this a bit harder. So I know you're all thinking, we just got hit with a nuclear bomb called COVID, every ED, and, it is very challenging to commit to quality work on other aspects of your job when the world is falling apart, and we recognize that. But there's some things here that we need to take into consideration as we have made these decisions, in addition to those that, it's been made all obvious to us. But, there are a lot of things still going right. In other words, there are some sites that are doing tremendous work and are still doing tremendous work in this space. And, overall, our numbers of CTs have decreased at some sites. So there is positivity here. So how can we learn from those high achieving sites? And what can we do now that we've got this track record of work and knowledge that we can apply and distribute everywhere? I think that's the most important take-home point from where we're at now. It's not just the challenge of bringing us back from the cliff here, but also understanding that we've got some good tools and learning from our experiences so far that we can apply and work together as a team. So to that end, we can do better. I think we all recognize that of all the quality initiatives that we are involved in MEDIC, the head injury quality initiatives are attached to the most robust evidence and have the best easy to use clinical support tools. So these challenges have always been present and we improved anyway. And we know that some sites are able to share with the good practices that they have that keep them in a very high achieving standard. And so we can use these rules and make interventions that can be implemented across the spectrum of MEDIC. We also think that of all the quality measures we have that are somewhat bulletproof to COVID, it's these. While our other, Keith already brought out the point that our other initiatives may have some overlap with some of the patients that may be affected with COVID, clearly in these measures, we should be able to continue to improve. So we want to take us into 2021 with taking all of those lessons that we've learned and really double down on head injury. And we're not going to leave you hanging. The coordinating center has spent a lot of time, particularly with the help of our small groups and our work groups, to come up with some tools that can really, or plug and play, that can help directly at your elbow in the emergency department. So in this next part of our meeting here, we're going to let Megan Hogikian take the wheel and tell you a little bit about how we're going to do that.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. You know, it's been a minute since many of you have seen my face, but have definitely been emailing with all of you, little nudges, reminders here and there. So great to be here speaking with you. So now that you've heard why we're doing All In for Head Injury in 2021, and you have an understanding of where we're at, which is not maybe where we'd like to be, but we really do believe that we can get better. I'm here to talk to you about some of the ways that the Coordinating Center is here to help you in 2021. These fall into three major buckets. So first are these medic endorsed practice toolkits. You've heard folks mention it at different points. Several of you have probably already seen some of these components or received them in the mail. I'm going to be going through these in much greater detail here shortly, but they are included in on our website. And for those of you who provided us with a mailing address, we did actually send out laminated copies of several of our toolkit elements. And if you haven't gotten those yet, please do send us your mailing address and we will get those out to you. As Michelle said, the goal with these toolkits is really to be plug and play, something that you don't have to think much about, you don't have to work hard for. You can print it from our website, go ahead, throw it out there. The second significant way that we are aiming to help you improve performance or help us improve performance in 2021 is with our new registry vendor. We are extremely excited at the Coordinating Center to be working with Arbor Research moving forward. The Coordinating Center has been working closely with them over the last few months already, and the new registry will be going live in 2021. So we'll go into a little more detail about that. And finally, we are very excited to be introducing our newest Coordinating Center member who will be working with all of you on some of your interventions and helping carry with the training and guidance for our abstractors. So, medic endorsed practice toolkits, where can I find them? I'm so glad you asked. If you go down to our website, the regular mediccqi.com website, and you look across the top menu, if you navigate to QI initiatives, you'll see a drop-down menu. And here we have a list of all of our current quality initiatives. And we have currently toolkits for every one of our initiatives. They are not all perfectly complete yet, however, they will be in very short order and the key components of each of them are available for you. So I'm going to walk you through one example here, but each of the pages mirrors this one. So let's say we clicked on CT for minor head injury. At the top of the page, you'll see a general overview explaining the measure, explaining the rule, kind of the why. Why did Medic work on this? Helps orient you or others to the initiative. Keep scrolling down and you'll see the meat and potatoes of our toolkits. So you can see that each of these documents is able to be downloaded from our website. So you, your providers, anybody, it's a website, it's public. All of you have the ability to download these materials, print them yourselves, use them, share them. That's why they're there. I'm going to go through each of these specifically here in just a few minutes. And then finally, if you continue scrolling down for each of the quality initiatives, you'll see a list of key references. And this is intended to be just honestly, a quick guide, something that you could direct colleagues, providers, peers to if they're interested in looking into more of the background behind one of our initiatives. So what's in these toolkits? Well, let me tell you, the last 6 months of my life, I'm very excited to tell you about these. So first up, for each of these, we have what we're calling a implementation guide. In a nutshell, it's just that. It is a high-level explanation of the various components of these toolkits, why you might want to consider using them as a part of your intervention for a given quality initiative. We help enumerate in a very, very short bullets here what the tool is, what it's not, and then suggest how you might consider using it. The goal here is to really use this as a jumping off point. We know that many of you have really great ideas about how to use all of this that are specific to your context. So this is not, you don't have to use it this way, but this is intended to help you jumpstart those conversations at your facility. Next, for each of the initiatives, we have a one-pager, just a normal 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, so easy to print, no wonky paper sizes. And this is a quick reference guide to whatever the endorsed practice is. So in this case, it's the Canadian CT head rule. We provide, the basics. Y'all are used to seeing this. There's a lot of versions of something like this out there. Effectively, this is saying, Medic endorses using this. Here's the basics of the rule. And then here's a list of several key references. So again, something that's very easy to pass out at a meeting, something that you can share digitally or email, etc. Next, for each of these, we have effectively a smaller version, a mini version of that original one-pager. So we call these reference cards. And the goal behind these is to really provide you with an at-the-elbow resource. These could fit into a lab coat pocket. They could easily be taped to the side of a computer monitor, something that you could just use as at a glance. Great for using with residents, clip it to a clipboard, that sort of thing. So literally just a small version as a reminder with the main components of the rule, just a little bit smaller. Like I said, we did mail out snail mail versions of these reference cards to everybody for the head injury quality initiative. We are in the process of putting together paper versions as well of the same reference cards, but for our other quality initiatives as well. So if you haven't gotten those yet, please email us. They're even laminated, so very COVID disinfecting friendly is a great option for everyone to use. In my opinion, this is one of the coolest things that we've created for, cool, I guess is relative, but for each of our quality initiatives. So we understand that a big part of the generating uptake for these rules, understanding that all of your providers don't spend all day, every day thinking about Medic the same way that we do. So we know that the education about the rules, why we're using them, where they came from, what kind of literature is backing up X, Y, and Z component of it, was it tested in this, that, the other population, that sort of thing. That's really important, and we respect that. And so what we've done is pull together what we're calling a supplemental PowerPoint for each of the quality initiatives. Effectively, it's a plug-and-play teaching tool. So say you, the clinical champion, have an upcoming Grand Rounds event. You want to talk about the new Medic PE algorithm. We have created a PowerPoint for you. It explains some of the maybe key questions, things that come up frequently. A good example in this case is we have a slide about intoxication and the Canadian CT head rule. So we really aim to pull out those most kind of controversial, challenging questions around each of these rules and to provide some very high level guidance as to why it was implemented in such a way, as well as references for it. So again, really hoping to decrease that administrative burden on all of you by providing you with these tools that you can simply, but it's relative again, but that you can just implement at your facility when and where is appropriate for you. Finally, the last component of these toolkits is what we call the flow sheet. So we have these again for every initiative. These are very helpful for demonstrating how Medic grades performance on a given quality initiative. So it will tell you how we define a cohort, what ICD-10 codes or chief complaints or what have you are pulled in, and then how is that distilled down to what we ultimately have as our numerator and denominator. We know oftentimes there are providers who are wondering how they're being scored on something very specifically. This helps them and can provide some background there. Similarly, if you need to talk to your administration about a given Medic measure, this is a really good reference and something that we would certainly encourage you to use. So all good things, and we're really very excited to be able to provide that for you. Again, we will be sending out some more reminders about these and everything will be available publicly on the website for all of you to use. So the second way that we are really, really excited to be supporting you in your quality improvement work in 2021 is with our new partnership with Arbor Research, an Ann Arbor-based company that is helping us with our registry. So we have heard a lot of feedback from all of you over the years about ways that we can optimize the MEDIC registry experience, things that would be helpful for you from a quality improvement perspective, just your own kind of internal data investigation perspective. And we have listened and taken copious notes on this. So very excited to be putting this into action with our partners at Arbor Research. So some of the main goals for this new registry are easier access to more data, not just the abstracted data that you currently see in the registry, but also that electronic data that typically needs to be pulled from the back end right now. Simplified data exportation, try and make it as few clicks as possible for you to get the data out of the registry that you want in the form of Excel spreadsheet, for example. More customizable and self-serve reporting and analyses. So again, being able to have a playground for the data, pull out the pieces that are important to you and to your providers that are meaningful, and put that easily into a report that you're able to share. And then finally, some definitely important quality pieces. So enhanced data quality checks, less registry downtime, things that give all of us good confidence in the integrity of our registry. And we really believe that these things will help. You know, a lot of this was from feedback from all of you over the years. We've certainly generated our own input on this at the coordinating center level. But we really hope that this will help answer some of those questions that you all have raised over the years about wanting to have access to performance data that you could more easily distribute to your providers, having the ability to customize reporting yourselves so that you don't necessarily have to ask the coordinating center for those analyses, as well as just having that on-demand access to a feedback loop that your providers might actually want to use because it's so easy and because they can get so much great data from it. So these are our goals. We hope overall this will decrease that administrative burden for our clinical champions, abstractors, administrators. We're very conscious of how hard you all work for the MEDIC Collaborative, and we're extremely grateful, and we hope that this will help launch us into kind of the next level of MEDIC 2.0. And finally, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our newest team member. Katie Guarnaccia will be joining the MEDIC Coordinating Center team starting on November 30th. The reason that Katie's introduction is in this section is because in addition to working with Carrie on training and guidance for the abstractors, Katie will also be working directly with all of you to help specifically track your your interventions rather, helping you work through challenges, providing more of that kind of one site on one coordinating center member discussion around ways that we can help you work through some of those hiccups. So again, really hoping to help launch us into the next level of our quality improvement. A little bit of background, Katie comes to us from Michigan Medicine, where she was working as a qualified pediatric emergency medicine nurse. And she is currently pursuing her MSN at the University of Michigan. So we are very, very excited to have Katie joining our team and can't wait for her to get started. So with that, I will transition over to Andy Scott to tell you how we're all being graded on all of this.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what Megan said, I think that we are really, I think the first meeting I ever went to with MEDIC was in last summer, and I had a couple people come up and say, we're really interested in how we can be better at these things. So I think that we've made a pretty big investment in trying to help you guys make improvements, and we want to be there for you. There are 9 going on 10 of us in the coordinating center. 5 going on 6 of us that's our full-time job. And I know that you are all pulled in a million different directions, but we have experience with this sort of quality improvement work, and we really want to be able to provide all of our members with anything we can to help you do the work at your site. We can't do every little thing for 25 and growing sites, but we want to be able to do everything we can with our time to help you. So, we've put together our best bets of what we think those things are, and Megan went through those, and we're excited about those, but please don't hesitate to tell us, hey, I've got another idea of something you could provide for us, or anything else that we can do to help make this work more successful for you. So my part here is really just to relatively quickly tell you about how the 2021 P4P and VBR gradings are going to work. This is a process that, just to give kind of a quick reminder of how this actually works, Keith alluded to a little bit earlier, is that the coordinating center takes the first shot at taking the pulse of where we are in the data and what's feasible given things such as COVID. Then we take that, using achievable benchmarks of care methodology to come up with what we think are probably the right targets for the year, and also how we want to distribute the 100 points for the P4P particularly. When we take that to the MEDIC Executive Committee, and that's where this committee is so valuable to our work, because they answer a lot of the questions listed there. Are, what are the unintended consequences? If we try to say you should have 90% efficient or appropriate head CTs, or a diagnostic yield of 20% on PE, what harm could we cause? What are the unintended consequences? And to give us a reality check of what it's like out there. We've got a very diverse set of facilities. Things are different. Things that work one place won't work another place. So that really is a great iterative process for us to understand what are the right targets, what's realistic, how can we do something that's meaningful but not stress your system in a way that's counterproductive and to your faculty, to your providers, and to your patients especially. So finally, we go through that process, and the index is approved by Blue Cross through the medical and the clinical leadership at Blue Cross. So that's how we get to this point. So I'll start with the Pay for Performance Index, the P4P, as you'll hear us call it. Since MEDIC is still a growing collaborative, we're still recruiting. We are still in that situation where year one sites, brand new sites, are graded 100% on participation. In your second year, it goes to 70% participation and 30% performance. Then finally, when you're, I guess, considered a mature participating site within MEDIC, it transitions over to 70% performance and 30% participation. So I'll go through each of these years quickly. So I think we have a few people on the call who are potential new members for year one. And when you think of these years, the one thing to remember is that these run from November 1st to October 31st. There's a little bit of an offset to the calendar year. So we're really excited about where we stand on recruitment. We don't have any finally signed participation agreements for sites starting for 2021. But we are hopeful of having up to 15, maybe even 16 or 17 new sites in MEDIC for 2021. So that would be really exciting to expand this work to different parts of the state, and to more density within the same parts of the states as well. So just quick for the year one sites that will be joining, all participation, like I said, getting the data delivery. So this is the electronic data that comes over from the EHR on time and accurate, getting abstraction up and running, coming to the meetings for both the clinical champion and the abstractor, hiring an abstractor, and then actually getting everything submitted. So, signing an agreement and then actually following through and getting everything set up. The one kind of prospective part of year two of the year one sites is that at the end of year one, which some of our current year one sites that are moving into year two do, is start planning for how are you actually going to do the performance improvement in your second year. So for our second year sites, we go to, like I said, again, 70% participation, 30% performance. The participation activities are very similar. Get your data on time, come to the meetings. And the new thing that comes into year two sites, and these are the sites, the three new Henry Ford sites in St. Mary's in Livonia and St. Mary's in Grand Rapids, are that this year in 2021, you will start taking place in the abstractor snap review. So that's something that's set up with Carrie or potentially Katie at this point to again, provide that quality assurance and teaching, really mostly teaching on the abstraction data. But this is the first year where these sites will be working on performance initiatives. So you can see the point distribution here. So we're all in for head injury on the collaborative as a whole. The year 2 sites are kind of slowly pulling into head injury. So you will be participating in the collaborative wide measure for adult CT appropriateness and intermediate risk. Actually, I think we have that wrong. The intermediate risk utilization for pediatric head CTs. So 5 points each on those, very small percentages. And the big new thing that you'll be working on, so all 5 of these sites are mixed hospital sites. So you know, the timing is perfect with Dr. Mahler's presentation this morning. 20 points will be on your safe discharge, low risk chest pain measure. And actually, one thing I should have mentioned at the beginning of this, all participating sites should have gotten an email from me late afternoon, early evening, realistically, by the time I got done with yesterday, with a lot more detail showing what the targets are, how do you get certain levels of partial points. We tried to come up with, you know, we've got the template for the performance index that comes from Blue Cross. It has all the detail. Also tried to boil those down into 1-pagers for each different year. So you should have gotten the appropriate 1-pager for you. So if you did not get the email from me, essentially it was yesterday, let us know and we can make sure that we get our distribution list right, or I don't think I missed anybody, but it's always possible. Then finally, for our year 3 sites, these are our more mature, farther along in the process, medic sites, 70% on performance, 30% on participation. So really for the participation, it's getting your data across from your IT contacts, getting your abstraction done, coming to the meetings, and again, the snap reviews, the data audits with Carrie and Katie. I know Carrie has spent a lot of time this year in 2020, even through the pandemic, doing a great job of mostly in person, but virtually getting, establishing a relationship with all the abstractors, really diving into the teaching and knowing, what your processes are, what limitations you have. And so hopefully, we'll have to figure out exactly how that looks going forward. Carrie wanted to, and we wanted to do in her first year, a real deep dive with everybody. So we'll see how that looks, but 5 points, again, just to ensure the data integrity of the abstracted data. When you look down at the performance, that's where the performance in the year 3 group is where you really can kind of see the weight of the all in for head injury. So looking at the middle 2 performance lines there, collaborative wide, adult and pediatric head injury, 30 points. So we're working on head injury. You're going to work collectively for 30 points, and then at your own site for 20 points. So the targets on those are slightly different. The collaborative wide target is a little bit lower than the site specific goal. But and again, all the deep details of this are in the email that I sent yesterday. But I think that the real take home is that, if you look at this, 50% of your points for pay for performance in 2021 are on these head injury initiatives. So we really, Megan worked very hard on getting all the things that she just talked about, the supportive tools, the toolkits. We really feel like, for all the reasons that Megan and Keith kind of talked about, there's the opportunity to get off the plateau, or especially any kind of regression, and push this up to the next level. Kind of, again, lining with what Dr. Grant said at the beginning, we would like to eventually move on to other things, and we feel like there is still opportunity to get these head injury initiatives to the next level. And I think that really, again, in consultation with the executive committee, diving all in, putting the points on head injury are, half of the points on head injury are kind of our push to get that done. The remaining 2 things for the Site 3 sites, site-specific safe discharge measure. So for everyone, 10 points on that. So for everyone other than Spectrum DeVos and Children's, downtown are working on lower risk chest pain, and our pediatric sites are working on uncomplicated asthma. And finally, like Keith talked about earlier, we've got PE and chest x-ray and CT overuse for pediatrics in maintenance, some of those kind of in the retirement phase, the CT overuse for pediatric head injury, and PE and chest x-ray in kind of a end of life cycle, for lack of a better term, maintenance. So Still some points there. We don't want everyone to take their eye off the ball, but really hoping that we can push head injury up to the real next level of performance and be able to think about what's next and bring PE and chest x-ray back to the forefront in future years to take that kind of final step on those. So again, I know that's a lot and it's quick, and I really feel like the deep details are going to be in those emails that you got from me yesterday. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Let us know what clarifications we can make. It's it's important to make sure everyone understands the way the grading works. And again, whatever ideas you have, I truly mean, for how can we better support you, that is for, like I said, 5 going on 6 of us, this is our full-time job to figure out how to make this stuff work. So please let us know your ideas and we'd be happy to dive into it. Last one, the value-based reimbursement, the VBR. So this is only for our year 3 sites, or I think we have 1 year 2 site who did backlog their data in 2020. This is, so in the past we've had 3 measures, this year only 2. So this year we're doing, again, all in for head injury, the adult CT appropriateness greater than 55%, and decreasing utilization on the intermediate risk. Pediatric minor head injury, less than 18%. One thing to note on this is in the past, our VBR measurement period has been January 1st to October 30th. We worked with Blue Cross to be able to better align these. So everything now is running November 1st to October 31st. So for both VBR and for pay for performance, you'll notice today obviously is November 6th. So we are 6 days into this performance period. So it is important to jump on this stuff right away in order to start hitting these goals. And so that's why we wanted to make sure we got you all the information and the kind of the background understanding of what we're going for with these. So that is basically everything with what we're looking for 2021. Check see, looks like we don't have any questions on that. Please email, phone, whatever, reach out with whatever questions you have, and I will turn it back over to Keith to finish up for us.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks everybody for sticking with us, of course. We are just going to close really with a few points I want to emphasize. So Michelle brought this up in the morning. We really do value your feedback. So, we take these comments to heart, we adjust, we want the best product out for you. So please take the time when you get this link to give us some feedback about the webinar experience, and we can make it better for you all next time too. Remember CME, for those that want this, please, this is a service we provide for all of you. And then finally, we are going to have another virtual meeting, of course, and it's March 5th. There's a link here too. You can look at our calendar of events and meetings in 2021. That would include all the committees as well. So just sort of final remarks here, stay healthy, stay safe, stay sane, and we will be with all of you and see you again in March.